Welcome to the Eat, Play, Love Fall Series. I'm Sandra Leah, Director of Education and Patient Advocacy at Obesity Matters. Meet my co-host, Rachel Atkins.
Hi, everyone. I'm Rachel, Director of Strategy with Obesity Matters. Welcome.
Thanks, Rachel. Obesity Matters is a nonprofit organization for people living with elevated weight and obesity. It was formed by patient advocates whose focus, sorry, my computer just went blank, whose focus is to provide evidence-based education and advocate for public policy and environmental changes that enable well-being. And if we can do that, we are one step closer to the acceptance and inclusions of millions of people in larger bodies. The Eat, Play, Love Fall series runs weekly interactive events with experts. The first half of the episode is an interview, and then we turn the spotlight on you to address your questions and comments in a safe and supportive environment. As we celebrate Thanksgiving, isn't it a wonderful time to pause? Pause and reflect on what we can be thankful for and grateful for, looking maybe to our health and how far we've come along in our own journeys. Today, our special guest is a patient advocate and culinary nutritionist, Tony Vassallo. I hope I said that right. Today, Tony will take us through his personal weight loss journey and offer tips to achieve healthy and sustainable weight loss and dietary wellness. Tony, we're thrilled to have you here with us today. Can you tell us a little bit about yourself and your incredible weight loss journey?
Great. Thank you very much. It's a pleasure to be here. So in terms of my journey, I guess just a little bit on the upswing first, and then we'll look at the downswing. I mean, as a child, prior to puberty, weight wasn't an issue. If anything, it might have been the opposite. You had to, from my understandings, you had to force feed me. I was actually somewhat anorexic if I look at pictures. And then something happened in puberty. Don't ask me what, but literally over the course of one summer, I remember leaving. I guess it would have been the summer before, and then coming back, and I can recall people not even recognizing me. I had changed so much over the summer. It gained a fair amount of weight. Weight had continued to be a struggle throughout late grade school. And then I can vividly recall an incident. I went to a Catholic high school and we needed a uniform, so we had to go to the uniform place, and they didn't have pants my size. And I think paraphrasing, but we've never had anybody this big before, I think is what I'd heard. And here we are 20 some odd years later, and that's still with me. So weight for the most part has been a struggle all my life. At the age of 37, so that was about 12 years ago, my aha moment was, for the most part, it was a two-parter. I had gone to my doctor's office, and he weighed me in, and for the first time I had crossed 300 pounds. And a couple weeks later, I needed to buy a suit for a wedding, and I was trying to squeeze into a 48 pant, and it wouldn't fit. I don't know why I was so surprised, because the ones at home were 48 inches. And that's when it hit me, that I was continually gaining weight exponentially. And that was the aha moment. I was at a Big and Tall store, very distraught. When I left the store, I remember going to the parking lot, sitting in my car for what seemed like forever, and a mishmash of emotions: frustration, anger, sadness. But at the same time, there was hope and positiveness of, that I really felt I was in a place ready to change. So fast forward, I talked to my doctor. I was set up with a dietitian. I started implementing better dietary habits, joined a support group. And my focus, quite frankly, was getting junk food out of my life. And in a 18-month period, I was able to lose 130 pounds. But more importantly, keep in mind, I was 37. I had diabetes, blood pressure, sleep apnea, gout, acid reflux, I think a handful of other things I don't even recall. And in that period of time, I was able to reverse a lot of those issues. So that's the executive summary. Basically, I disconnected my relationship with junk food.
Wow, such a powerful story. I feel like so many of us can relate to walking into a store and not be, especially, years ago. I think today there are definitely more options, but
Mhm.
certainly when I was shopping, there were very, very few options going through high school and never feeling like I could be a part of or find anything that fit right, and how that impacted my self-esteem. So I think you really put that eloquently, and to be able to reverse so much, and it's incredible, and does point to also the age. You can imagine for a moment, if you had stayed on that trajectory, where would your health be today, right, in comparison? But I think what I admire most about your story was this is the simplicity, right? You got rid of the junk foods,
Mhm.
and it sounds like you have a real passion for cooking. Can you tell us about your Just Eat Real Food movement and why it means so much to you?
Yeah. So on the cooking front, I mean, even as a child, I was always enthralled by cooking. But when I had discovered, I don't know if you recall, but the PBS and had their Saturday morning cooking shows. It was Julia Child, Jacques Pepin. It was another fellow by the name of Pierre Fernet, and several others. And that's where I think I really realized that cooking is something that I really enjoy. Um, and then to your point about the simplicity, I mean, that's where Just Eat Real Food, or the acronym being JERF, comes from. Um, so prior to that, um, me losing weight, I had never officially tried any weight loss program. And my approach, I think somebody upstairs is looking after me, was just focus on not eating junk food. I didn't have this acronym JERF at that time. My mantra that back then was just stay away from crap. And then over the course of time, I developed this JERF concept, just eating real food, for that very point that you raised of keeping it simple. That's kind of my logic in life. I find if things get too complex, I go. If I look at some of the things out there, the macronutrient things, and some of the other methods that I'm not going to name, I quite frankly don't think I'd be successful by using this Just Eat Real Food. And knowing what I know now, I think if, quite frankly, if the majority of folks, as a starting point, use that framework, I personally think would have less recidivism, um, definitely better dietary habits by keeping this Just Eat Real Food framework.
Mm. Thanks, Tony. Many of us in this community are all too familiar with the concept of weight regain. As someone that's, lost a lot of weight over a long period of time, can you share with us any tips to help with sustaining weight loss?
So I think there's a handful. I'll focus on two core that I really feel have helped me. I mean, and there's the old adage of we hear it all the time, lifestyle, and got to make a lifestyle versus a diet, and then we got to really delve into what is lifestyle. It's changing our life. Um, so for me, I think viscerally, I really wanted to let go of that stuff and some of my dietary habits, and even some of my thinking. And I put emphasis on the term let go versus give up. And I think maybe at one time, oh my God, I have to give up this and give up that. So I don't like the word give up. Give up to me is being forced to against one's will. Letting go is more of a serene thank you for the memories, if you will, but goodbye. So again, life's at viscerally, I really feel from the very early stages, it was what I wanted. I literally wanted to let go of the crap. So it was versus a diet. And the second thing, and I don't think I really truly understood this until well into maintenance, um, is finding other things to use as a coping mechanism for our life stressors versus food. Um, uh, Engaging with life, other passions, versus using food as a coping mechanism. And if I can just backtrack a little bit on the lifestyle, I had learned that when I tried to reintroduce certain foods, that it was very difficult for me to moderate. intuitively, before I understood the science, it was like I have a little, I want more, and I want more, and I want more. So the other thing in terms of the lifestyle is I did incorporate more of an addiction paradigm with certain foods. So lifestyle being, viscerally changing, and then finding ways, healthy ways to deal with life stressors other than food.
That really resonates well. The whole idea of letting it go as opposed to giving it up, it definitely feels more freeing, almost empowering. So I'm gonna take that away for sure. So what was your biggest challenge, Tony?
Well, if I can get sneak in too, one is what I call palate fatigue. Palate fatigue. I can get bored. I know that there's many people in my life, they literally can eat the same thing over and over and over again, like Groundhog Day. And I sometimes wish I could be more like them, because I think it simplifies the journey. But I'm the complete opposite. I think I can barely eat the same thing twice in a lifetime. I'm exaggerating. But so to answer your question, palate fatigue, I need variety. And that's where I think the culinary piece ended up being in my favor versus negative, if you will, being able to find different ways to prepare foods. And even sometimes, I mean, quite frankly, just one example, I mean, I typically have some sort of grain in the morning, oats, millet or something. And then I just found if I change the bowl or change the presentation somewhat, that just gave me the a little bit of something different. So the biggest challenge was palate fatigue, and the solution was to find variety and be creative. And the second one taps in a little bit to what we just talked about, and by far is the most challenging, is stress, anxiety / stress. It's still ingrained in me that when significant stress or anxiety, the early days of the pandemic would be the best example. All of a sudden, I'll hear that voice that I need to reach out for food. And a short example. So in the early days of the pandemic, March 2020 was kind of the 10-year anniversary of me taking on the journey. There were foods that I hadn't craved, hadn't desired for a decade. And in the early days of the pandemic, and I think you folks got into it with Laura in this series, how the pandemic just all of a sudden was this life stressor. And to the point where, I mean, foods I hadn't craved, all of a sudden it's noisy. Like, where did this come from? So to answer your question about challenges is understanding that when new stresses, excessive stress, chronic stress comes in my life, not to reach out for the food while it may seem like the default to go to.
Yeah, that's so true. And so many people can relate, especially during the pandemic. I mean, who here has lived through a pandemic? And so that stress and distress that we were living through, our brain kind of defaults to old patterns of, oh, well, I know what could be really comforting right now, which could be really shocking for somebody who has spent 10 years not having to deal with that. With Thanksgiving around the corner, I was wondering if you had any lessons that we can practice on mindful eating, with celebrating with family and friends, and also just knowing that the holidays can be joyful, stressful, lonely, too much, right? Everyone experiences the holidays really differently, but one thing that's everybody has in common is that food is going to be a big part of this weekend.
Yeah, absolutely. Excellent point. And so for me, and just to tap into your last point, I think for about it being about food, and that's something that I have had to learn, that conditioned message of the event being, the food being the main event. That's something that I find I have to disconnect from that. Food is certainly a part of it, whether it's a celebration, Thanksgiving, Christmas. And I'd use the example of a wedding. I mean, quite frankly, I don't know, this is going to be interpreted, but at one point in my life, when I was invited to a wedding, I could care less, about the people and how much they cared for each other. It's like, what are you going to feed me? That was like my priority. And that's some screwed up thinking, admittedly. But to your point, so I find for me, when it comes to the mindfulness of celebrations and events, is I need to be aware of that conditioned message. It's not about the food. The food is part of it. it's about the event. So in this case, it's Thanksgiving, giving thanks, for the harvest. In this case, I think we have a lot more to be thankful this year, or whatever in our life. So the core is to understand. I feel, and for me to be successful in this, is to disengage less with the food, and along the same lines. For in the old days, stuffing myself to the point where I was ill, either that evening or the day before, that's not self-care. Okay. And quite frankly, it's the opposite. And the other things I'd suggest is focusing on quality versus quantity. So for example, Christmas, Thanksgiving for myself might get a really high-end turkey, organic turkey, premium meats, if you will. So focus on the quantity versus the quality, and not making it the big buffet. And more so, I mean, for me, it's smaller gatherings, where the bulk of the food is vegetables versus maybe in the old days where it's, the vegetables are more of a garnish on my plate, versus now it's the bulk of the plate. Other things that I find helpful: sit down and slow down. Something I've learned over time. Some of my worst dietary decisions are not at the kitchen table or dining room table. They're in the car, at a desk, over the kitchen table. So sit down and slow down. And the other thing I'd suggest is either the moderation or limiting of alcohol. I've learned over the years that while we tend to fret over the caloric consumption of alcohol, alcohol can sometimes be a gateway to either excessive eating or unhealthier eating.
Oh, those are great tips. And I really love the shifting the focus from the food to the people and the event, right? And so I think that even what is your intention? So if you're going into a Thanksgiving lunch or dinner, what is your intention? And I, like you, Tony, my intention was what's going to be served, and I'm going to skip lunch so I can really eat as much as I can. And which later meant I was a lousy guest because I was stuffed, remorseful, I wasn't present for anybody. And so I'm going to, take your advice and make sure that my intention is to sit down, slow down, and be present for the people in that room. So what was the inspiration? Not many people know this, but you curated a documentary called Follow Me, which people can find, and you'll let us know where. And you followed, I believe, 16 people who had sustained and significant weight loss. I had the honor of being on that documentary with you. What was the inspiration behind it?
Yes, and thank you very much. And it was a pleasure to have you and some others in our circles part of it. So Follow Me, the documentary on sustained weight loss, was exactly that. We looked at 16 different people, different ages, different parts of the world, or North America, I should say. And so the inspiration behind it, quite frankly, was the article, and sadly I think a lot of people can recall the New York Times article that came out, what was the date, 2016, on The Biggest Loser. And somebody in my life realized how frustrated I was. I always detested that show. I didn't like the message that the primary message that was coming on, or that was being portrayed in the New York Times article, The Biggest Losers, that you're doomed to gain it all back. They did bring up some valid concerns, as we have addressed here, about recidivism. So the inspiration behind it was a message of hope. We shared the journeys of 16 people and their perspective, in the 60-minute documentary called Follow Me.
What was really powerful about that documentary too is that everybody had a different road to recovery, and it was so interesting to hear how everyone got to where they were going and how they maintained it too.
Yeah, and on that, sorry, my apology, and on that, and that was just even for myself. I mean, I think when I initially started in the early stages of that, I think I was a much more black and white thinker. There's one way to do this, and as you very eloquently pointed out, they were various paths.
And people are asking, where can they find the documentary so they can watch it this weekend?
So the best place is just to link up to the webpage, followmefilm.ca, followmefilm.ca. And if you go to the trailer, there's a link in there. We're uploading it on the website soon. I was hoping it would be there by today, but it's not. But if you go to the trailer, there's a link to the full version. It's on one of my personal pages for now. But followmefilm.ca is the best place.
Oh,
and then
okay. Follow Me Film. Okay, I'm gonna put that in there. Over to you, Rachel.
Yeah, and we'll include it in the show notes as well. Thank you so much, Tony, for that documentary. It was so very compelling. And I really resonated with so many parts of the various stories that were told. So thanks for making that happen. One of my favorite questions is the magic wand question. So if you had a magic wand, Tony, knowing everything that you know and all those stories that you brought to life in that documentary, what would you change about the world that we live in today for those of us that struggle with weight?
So no, I'll delve into my personal journey for that question. There's no doubt in the early days, I put all the emphasis on weight. This was a weight loss project. However, without knowing it, it really was a project about nurturing. And I'd really like to see a world where we put less emphasis on weight loss organizations, and more on nurturing or self-care. And then hence, the weight and or the metabolic issues such as that I had myself would follow. A project of self-care, and I really like the word nurturing, quite frankly.
Yeah, so do we here at Obesity Matters. And we're just creating this community where we're, I think, almost a year old now. And I know you have a very strong community, and we were wondering if you had any guidance that you can offer to us as we support our community.
Yeah, and kudos to you folks. I think you've done a fabulous job over the course of the year in the message that you promote. So to answer that question, so the thing that drives me every morning, the JERF mantra, to just eat real food, and on a part of that would be the empowerment. I'm trying to give you the executive summary. But the more I learned about processed food, and I know it's something you're very passionate about, it's mind blowing. The emphasis, the efforts, the emphasis. It's almost like it was if we look at the food industry, which is predominantly the same playbook of the tobacco industry, is so including empowerment and education about processed foods and ultra processed foods, whether it's to our health, our palate, to incorporate that in the cognitive behavioral therapy, so education. And when I say education, I don't mean calories and all that. Quite frankly, I'd like to throw that out the window, but more along the lines of literally the tactics of the food industry. For me, and many in my group and my circles, I find the more empowered we get, I look at it as a David and Goliath battle, and it's one of the things that I think was in your last with Dr. David. He talked about, and I chuckled, at a hardware store, there's candies, and clothing store. It's mind blowing. So I kind of like to look at that as you bastards, this is your technique. So to answer the question in summary, is just the message of empowerment and more awareness of what the food industry is doing.
Yeah, and if you want to get really fired up about the food industry, know that they're targeting children. The cereals that are out right now, Tinbit, so mini donuts in cereal, or like these crazy concoctions. And who are those for? Kids. Because if we can hook kids on this early, then they know they have customers for life. So
absolutely.
Couldn't agree with you more. Now it's time to turn the spotlight onto the audience. The floor is now open for your questions. We will alternate between live questions and the ones in the chat box in order of relevance. We encourage you to turn on your camera when you're ready to ask your question, introduce yourself, and let us know where you're tuning in from. Please raise your hand virtually using the Zoom feature. So I'm just going to check here. I don't think we have any hands up, but I'm going to check in with Rosie on the chat box.
Great, thank you so much. We do have a question from Donna Coleman, and she's addressing support for people who go to events that they find damaging, where they are struggling with food and they're trying to manage their weight, and she's wondering if there's a way to get support for this kind of situation. She asks about counseling in particular, and what kind of help would be best.
Okay, and that's well, I'll definitely acknowledge, and I think, I mean, even 10 years into this, I mean, the social, what's the word, the pressures that at events that are put upon us, and I think it's more the conditioning. In terms of specific, I mean, I don't know, within the Obesity Matters team, I know there's, I mean, over the last few, with this series and previous series, there's been no shortage of guests, and my understanding, is in one of the last, probably not your last segment with the breathing, but the one of the last two with Laura or David. I know the Obesity Matters was thinking of what's it called, like a list of resources.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Definitely. And also you offer Tony support as well. I believe you have a support group. Is that correct?
Yeah, so I do. We have a weekly support group. I'm predominantly working with males. The group is open to everybody, and feel free to look up motonutrition.com. And it's a weekly support group, and we do tackle these issues, right? We approach it more from an, I'd say, more of an empowerment and community. When it comes to the cognitive behavioral, maybe some more of the psychology piece, that's where I think some of the experts that you've had may be in a position. But if you're looking for community, again, it's open to everyone. Our group is predominantly males, so if females feel comfortable in that environment, you're more than welcome to join us. More info is on motonutrition.com.
Thank you. And as well, people can go over to My Weight, What to Know, and there is a clinic locator if you are looking specifically for a healthcare provider in this space. Rosie, back to you.
Okay, great, thank you. Laura Johnstone is wondering about prescription products that help manage weight and obesity. Do you have an opinion on that?
I mean, personally, I try to obviously stick to real food. That's been at the foundation of my success. I do realize there are other options or things that can work alongside. It's not my area of expertise, but I definitely encourage people to focus in on the real food in proper intervals too, because that's something I overlooked. Creating structure in your life, the 3 solid meals a day is what I encourage. But quite frankly, in terms of things outside of that, that's not my area of expertise.
Thank you. I actually had a question for you. I'm just now getting into cooking. What should I have as staples in my kitchen to make, because I feel like I'm always searching for the base of something. What are some easy tips to get someone like myself, a novice, going?
Yeah, boy, where to start? I definitely encourage, and that's one of the challenges that I see for those just kind of getting into it. So first of all, keeping it as simple as possible. And then, I mean, my dietary mantras, we have some protein and vegetables at every meal. So start off with the veggies that you like and the protein that you like. And honestly, I think one of the best resources out there is YouTube for somebody just starting. I mean, YouTube has done, I mean, there's obviously a lot of unhealthier cooking in YouTube. But what YouTube has done, I mean, as much as I loved watching an hour program on the PBS days, YouTube has and our technology now can take something that's an hour and really condense it. So this might surprise you, but harnessing our ability to our technology now in YouTube. So if it's a way to prepare a vegetable that you like that you're not accustomed to, searching it on YouTube and finding it. And the other thing, just on terms of staples, I would say we made a great deal of progress in the freezer section. I mean, the amount of things, whether it's legumes, the variety of vegetables, the fruits, even some of the packaged frozen proteins, compared to even 10 years ago, that section of the grocery store has we have to give them credit, because a lot of the stuff can go straight from the freezer to the microwave or a slight defrost. So delve into your freezer section.
I can agree more. I find that so true because they're frozen at peak ripeness. And it's especially broccoli, right? It's already cut, it's washed, and it's peak freshness. So back to you, Rosie. Any questions on the chat box?
Yes, thank you. Kathleen Budd asked a question that reminds me of what you were referring to, Tony, about empowerment and helping people look for what you describe as real unprocessed food. Kathleen's wondering, is there any way to be more aware of food industry tricks to help empower people to choose foods that are healthier for them?
Yeah, and that is the key, is just understanding the tricks, the health halos, the marketing that goes behind it. I feel with a few months. So for me, the couple of resources, first of all, Michael Pollan, and I got the book right here. As old as the book is, probably a decade, there's two versions. This is the, I actually think Michael Pollan's Food Rules book is probably one of the most reader-friendly executive summaries that you can read on just getting to the fundamentals of real food. But quite frankly, I think looking at the ingredient list, the number of ingredients, are they recognizable ingredients, are really key. And I think within about a few months of education, whether it's books, two excellent documentaries I'll throw out there. I'm a huge documentary fan. One of them is Michael Pollan's. It's hard to find, but it is on YouTube. In Defense of Food. It originally came out on PBS. I think they just took it off Netflix, but it's out there in the world. In Defense of Food. And another one that from the CBC, and it's still online, Food for Thought. These documentaries, in 60 minutes, I think you'll learn so much. I think you'll also walk away extremely empowered. Plus, they're done in a very not user, but watcher. If you're on the other end of the TV, what are you? You're a viewer. Yeah. It's done in a very viewer-friendly way. And there's several others, but Food for Thought, which I know for sure, if you go to YouTube, Food for Thought, it's on CBC, The Passionate Eye. Some very credible people behind that documentary. If you can find In Defense of Food, that came out to probably 2015 in PBS, another empowering documentary.
Thank you. We have a live question from Corrine. Please unmute. Let us know where you're tuning in from.
Hi, I'm tuning in from Ottawa.
Hello.
Hi there.
Beautiful. It's a beautiful sunny day here. Tony, I wanted, what comes to mind and always comes to mind for me is the saying, I live to eat, or I eat to live. Can you tell us what, if that means anything to you, or in terms of, there's so many people like they put food in because it's energy. It's versus sitting down, socializing. We're coming up with Thanksgiving, or we want to socialize with our friends, and food is, for me, food is a part of that.
Yeah, you bring an excellent point. And you actually had me going down memory lane. And while we're all different, I do think I first of all try to avoid the two extremes and trying to find a nice happy place in between. And for some, food is sustenance, and that's it. And then but on the other end of the extreme, and I'll say that I was living in that world. It was all about the food, events, vacations, where I would go, all revolved around the food. So that's the living to eat. Or I'm sorry, I'm dyslexic. I always mix up the two, but I think I got the principle. So for me, it was a total 180. Again, I think you bring up an excellent point. I think it's finding the balance between, the unhealthy relationship with food where your entire life revolves around it. And then again, I mean, and also for some, food is sustenance, and that's their mantra, and that works for them. For me to be successful, I think I found that healthy balance, I still have the passion for cooking. I stay away from the unhealthier foods. But I think at the cusp of it is the general mantras, eat to live.
And if I could interject, what I've heard many times from my clients is when they are able to have their 3 meals a day and then life in between, right? So they're able to have a beginning of their meal to the end of their meal, and then that's done, and then they live their life, right? They're present at work, they're doing things with their kids, they have the energy to do their passion, and then they have their next meal. But it doesn't, like you said, doesn't take over all their mental real estate. It's not about, eating and then maybe trying to recover from that eating, or eating in a way that robs them of energy, or robs them of health, or robs them of emotional stability. But really, like you said, using food for its rightful purpose, right? So its rightful purpose is to nourish our bodies, honor our bodies, energize our bodies, as opposed to when food is used, and people, maybe, I relate to that word very well, but using food maybe as a vehicle for pain relief, or numbing out, or comfort, or suddenly the food is the celebration. And so just that, it's a very nuanced difference. Does that answer your question, Corrine?
Yeah, sort of. I have something to follow up on.
Yeah, please.
In terms of, eating kind of whole foods, or, going back to basics. I mean, I love cooking. I love reading cookbooks. For myself, it's a huge investment of time. Taking care of myself is my number one priority. And, and getting to my best weight is my goal. And that involves, and you said this earlier, is the stress, right? Is managing the stressful situations, things that are in my control anyways. So what I realized is how much time I invest in, buying food, menuing, journaling, making the food. That's hours a week. It's not 3 hours. It's more like 30 hours, so that I get the right combination of protein, fiber, and, with, meals and then snacks. So, and based on the busyness of my day. So all that to say is, what's the investment, Tony, and anybody else who wants to jump in, is what is your investment of time related to food preparation and eating?
Yeah, so on the time front, I think because cooking for me is therapy, I probably put a lot more time in it than that maybe is necessary to meet the fundamental basic of providing a nutritious meal. In terms of the time, I mean, in our hectic world, I'll definitely acknowledge, there's a short window. So one of the things I suggest, and even for myself, when time isn't so readily available, having the go-tos that, where we can batch cook, So some of the examples, and there's probably some more. I mean, soups and stews are at the top of the list. They're really ideal for batch cooking. And I know during my early days, my commute was an hour and a half each way to work. And obviously there was an 8-hour day in between, sometimes longer. When you come home, you don't feel like cooking. So I mean, I remember, so chili was a big go-to for me. And in the old days, chili was not the most nutritious meal, but chili is an excellent example where with a few tweaks, it can be made more nutritious, leaner meats, perhaps less of it, lots more vegetables. But soups, stews, and or chilies are really conducive towards batch cooking, many of which freeze well. So if you're coming home or making lunch, they're just heat and eat. So there's relatively no time. And if you're comfortable with having the same thing multiple times in a week, very conducive. Now for protein, that's another thing I think that gets forgotten in terms of batch cooking. So for example, this week and a couple other times, now I live alone, but I'll cook a whole chicken. I butterfly it. So butterfly means you cook it flat. So it cooks a bit quicker. Now, it does take 45 minutes to an hour, but I'll batch cook 2, or depending on, sometimes I'm alone, sometimes I'm looking after my dad. So there's 2 of us here. So then I'd make more. But now the protein is already cooked. So when I come home, the protein's done. All I need is a vegetable. And that's where, if I have the time, I'll use the fresh. And we talked about the frozen earlier. So one part of the meal is done. And then another thing, for example, batch cooking in the morning, I'm a big fan of grains. So batch cooking oats. So to executive summary, to simplify or reduce the time, I find it's just a batch cooking is really the way to go.
Yeah. And also looking at your return on investment. So I get it, like self-care takes time, right? By the time I sit in my meditation and then I work out and then I have my meal prepping for the day, it's hours, but my return on investment. So I don't try to look at the time, because I used to get discouraged by that and think I'm a very busy person like everybody else. But now I'm like, but what's my return on investment? It's massive in comparison to the hours spent. So something to consider. Anything else in the chat box, Rosie?
Yes, absolutely. So there's a question around, reminds me of your comment earlier, Tony, or your story about the uniform, where you were looking for a certain size and they gave you feedback that the size wasn't available for you, and that stuck with you. The question is really around, how do you deal with an event that is so striking that it may impact how you make your food choices? For example, this person describes an event that haunts her, and that she's concerned about and wondering how best to deal with it. So maybe how did you deal with the uniform situation? That might help provide some direction or guidance.
Yeah, so hopefully I'm interpreting the question correctly, but it just maybe in terms of events and people's I and some felt this was extreme, including myself in the beginning, but when I look back, it was the right thing to do. Over the course of that first year, there were events that I didn't go to. And I got some flack from some, including some self-flack. But looking back, it was the right thing to do. It was important. I felt, like, for example, some of the cottage weekends, which would have been just all about eating and drinking all weekend. I mean, what was the point? And the other thing is, when it comes to certain people that maybe aren't as supportive, they're either in my life less, and or it's non-eating situations. If events revolve around food, I have a new lifestyle now, and that event isn't one that interests me. Again, I may have misinterpreted the question. Forgive me.
Yeah, I kind of read it as this person had, because I'm looking at it, and if they want to unmute, we could definitely have a great conversation. Weight gain demise, so a single event that haunts them. So I don't know, right? It could be many things. We know that there's a correlation between, for example, childhood trauma and obesity, and so if something has been a poignant event in your life that you can really point to this weight gain issue, definitely seeking outside help and support and professional help to help you work through that. And especially if it's something that haunts you in today, probably merits having somebody help you through it. Sometimes we can only go so far in our own minds.
Right. I'm the one that I just unmuted. I'm the one that was talking about that. I guess what I was trying to get at is, like, I had an event and I'm wondering if it could be so traumatic that it could, like, I keep thinking it's the sole reason why I've gained weight since that moment. And then I say to myself, oh, that can't be possible. You're just making excuses, for gaining weight. But in my case, it was an ex-husband who left me, and on him walking out the door forever and leaving me and two very young children alone, his parting words were, I'm not attracted to you anymore. You've let yourself get fat, cut your hair short. Meanwhile, I had two little babies. And this was his parting words. And I've never forgotten that. And I just continued to gain weight and gain weight and gain weight. And even at that time, I was probably 70 pounds less than I am right now. Mm-hmm. And I really wasn't overweight for somebody who had just had a child. But I've let that haunt me.
Yeah, I'm sorry that happened to you. That sounds really hard and devastating. Definitely. And it does sound like something that would need outside support, and helping you gain that perspective that comment had everything to do with that person and nothing to do with you.
I mean, I guess my question was, can that one event actually cause this much trauma, or am I making excuses? That's what I think I was getting at.
Well, trauma is an interesting thing, right? It's how you process that trauma at that time, how much meaning you've given it, how much time, energy, and consideration you've given it, right? And so it's definitely something that you need to explore with a healthcare provider who really understands that. I think that looking at the situation through the eyes of compassion, like, how can you be compassionate with yourself? And you are where you are, and you can get help and you can get better today.
Okay. Yeah. Because as soon as Tony said about the suit, trying to get the suit to fit, I just thought, whoa, like, he said that was his moment, right? And I thought, how do I get this moment to overcome this trauma from this comment that was thrown at me?
Yeah,
instead of giving me a moment, I went the other way.
Mm-hmm. Go ahead.
Okay. Oh, yeah. No, we definitely, I think a lot of people can relate to comments from like that and how they can shape our lives. Tony, did you have anything to add?
Yeah, I'm really sorry to hear of that. And that sounds like that was an incident that was thrown at you. And to Sandra's point, you definitely got to seek help. Blaming yourself is I encourage you to avoid that thinking. The suit that served for me as the trajectory moment, as in, okay, I need to address this so my health issues don't continue. But what you've just shared is something that sadly somebody, it sounds like, thrust upon you, and it's not right.
So we do need to start wrapping up a little bit earlier, because Tony was kind enough to put a video together today of a cooking demonstration that you're not going to want to miss, because this is one of his most sought after recipes just in time for Thanksgiving. So I just want to take this moment to offer our sincere thanks to Tony for his generosity, giving us time today. Definitely my biggest takeaway is just eat real foods. And, it sounds simple, for sure. And if we lived 150 years ago, it would be super easy because that's all there was whole foods. But in that journey, letting go of focusing on that number on the scale and turning the lens over to self-compassion, self-love, self-acceptance, and the energy and the motivation that will give you to perhaps making those choices to select real foods more attainable for you. Over to you, Rachel.
Well, Tony shared so many great takeaways and insights, but I have to say the play on words of using let it go over give it up, that's something I'm really going to be using a lot more of, because I think that's very empowering and powerful.
I agree. Get involved as a member of our Obesity Matters community. We will be sending out a survey and would appreciate you completing it so we can continue to build programs that are recommended by you, our community. This is our final session of the Eat, Play, Love Fall series, but don't worry, we're gonna be back for a holiday edition to get you in the right frame of mind and right frame of heart for the holiday season. We will end today's session with a Thanksgiving treat from Tony, a cooking demo of his all-time favorite apple crumble recipe. And we're gonna show that now and then end the meeting and wish you a wonderful long weekend and wonderful Thanksgiving. So over to you, Tony.
Okay, I'll share it momentarily. Just a big thank you to everybody. I thank you, of course, for Obesity Matters for having me. I thoroughly enjoyed it today. And thank you for joining us, everyone in the virtual world. Great seeing you. And here is my sugar-free roasted apple crumble. I am hopeful you can see it on the screen. It should be just a black screen.